Amy Winehouse, Back to Black. Never heard it. There are two reasons why I never heard this album, and neither one of them have anything to do with Amy's talent as an artist. It has to do with us and how we tend to lose it when white people in general, and white British people specifically, make R&B music. The two producers on this album are Mark Ronson and Salaam Remi. Now Mark Ronson is famously all over the music spectrum, but his pre-Winehouse work includes production for Sean Paul, Saigon, Old Dirty Bastard, Rhyme Fest, Macy Gray, Christina Aguilera, and Lily Allen. And guess which one of those artists got him a Grammy nomination? If you're a hip-hop fan, you definitely know Salaam Remi from his work with everyone from the Fugees to Nas. He's been in the game for over 30 years, producing dozens of albums for tons of hip-hop, R&B, dancehall, and reggae artists. But Back to Black is considered his crowning achievement. Well, that and Ready or Not by the Fugees. Now, I'm not saying that these white artists don't deserve our attention, but it's just frustrating when black artists of the same caliber don't get the same recognition as their white counterparts. So when I first heard of her, I was a little standoffish. The second reason why I never heard this album has nothing to do with her talent, but with her aesthetic. It seems like once a year when an artist needs a hit, they reach into the mid-century grab bag and pull out a Motown drum beat, and it pretty much always works. Whether we're talking about Jet, The Strokes, Meghan Trainor, Pharrell, Lauryn Hill, the 60s sound is so engraved in modern music that it pretty much always gets a positive reaction. So when I saw that she was using the 60s vibe throughout her whole album, it kind of felt like she was using a cheat code. And again, I was a little standoffish. What made me want to listen to this album was seeing it on Rolling Stone's 500 Greatest Albums of All Time, sandwiched in between two of my personal favorite albums, Beyonce's Lemonade and Stevie Wonder's Innovations. So I figured I owed it to myself to at least check it out. So I did. So the first thing that I want to say that Amy Winehouse is one of the greatest songwriters of her time. She has a great voice, but her true talent is her ability to convey these really complex human emotions in as few words as possible. She does this all over the album, but my personal favorite is Wake Up Alone, a song where she's doing everything she can to keep from thinking about this guy, probably Blake, but as soon as the night comes, she's overwhelmed with sadness. And she conveys this wealth of sadness in just 2 8-bar verses. On other songs like You Know I'm No Good and Addicted, she writes like an MC, and it doesn't surprise me that Nas and Ghostface were big fans of hers. I'm not going to do a track-by-track review because all the songs on this album pretty much stick to the same script. If you love one of these songs, you probably love them all. Unfortunately, I only liked these songs. I really struggled with the aesthetic of this album. The 60s girl group doo-wop sound really started to wear thin for me about halfway through. The artists that she looks up to, like Sarah Vaughan and Dinah Washington, are artists that I listen to and have for years, and hearing her just copy that, well, I put it this way. When I hear Sharon Jones and the Dap Kings, it sounds like a match made in heaven. When I hear Amy Winehouse and the Dap Kings, it sounds like cosplay. It really saddens me to say that, and it's even more sad that she's no longer with us because I really wanted to hear what she was going to do next. I listened to her posthumous album Lioness, Hidden Treasures, hoping that I would hear other sounds, and unfortunately I didn't. But I will say that Nas's verse on Light Smoke was better than it needed to be. So after that, I went back and I listened to Frank, an album that's a little rough around the edges, but I enjoyed it a lot more. Not because the songs are better, but because it just sounded like her. She wasn't copying her heroes. She was incorporating their sound into hers. I'm really on the fence about this one. This album is considered a classic because it popularized British soul throughout the 2000s, and it paved the way for artists like Adele, Duffy, and Estelle to gain recognition on a larger stage. It's hard to imagine a world where Adele isn't a superstar, but maybe this is the album that tipped the scale. But Amy wasn't the only Brit making soul music in the early 2000s. Floetry and Joss Stone were making noise around that time too. I guess the reason why I'm apprehensive to call it a classic is because I'm not fully convinced that this album started a movement. Had this album never existed, Brit Soul would have kept plugging away like it did in the 90s with Brand New Heavies and Jamiroquai, or in the 80s with Simply Red and Soul to Soul, or in the 70s with Heat Wave and Average White Band, and so on and so on. I understand people's emotional connection to this album, it completely makes sense, and I wish in my heart that I could consider it a classic like so many other people do, but I just can't. So if you're upset by anything that I just said, instead of leaving an angry comment, why don't we have a conversation? 1, please let me know what did this album do that no other album at this time had done. And 2, If this album had not existed, what artist would sound completely different or not exist at all? Let's have a conversation. Like I said before, I really wish she was still here because I would have loved to hear what she would have done next, and I think the world really missed out on something special. So have you heard Back to Black? Are you still bumping it to this day? I'm going to keep reviewing albums until I run out. Until then, I am Free Tillman, the only guy on the internet that doesn't know everything. Peace.